The younger man's heart. She was married. He was 20. Everything was about to change. The gym smelled like polished wood and sweat, the particular perfume of teenage ambition. Somewhere in the middle of the court, a 13-year-old boy was dribbling between orange cones, his movements sharp and earnest, still years away from the fluid grace of a real player. I watched from the baseline, clipboard in hand, calling out corrections that fell on ears too focused on the ball to hear me properly. Shoulder square, Marcus. You're rotating before you land, fix that. Marcus' chin slowed, nodded, reset. He had his father's build, broad-shouldered and solid, though his eyes were all his mother. Bright, watchful, a little too knowing for a kid his age. I'd been training him for 3 months now, since his parents enrolled him in our academy after his school team flopped at the regional championships. Pacific Rim Basketball Academy wasn't flashy. We were the kind of place where serious families came when their kids needed actual development, not just a place to burn energy on weekends. Head coach Derek hired me because I could actually play. I'd been heavily scouted coming out of high school, offers from half the Pac-12, before everything fell apart my sophomore year at USC. But that was a story I kept buried under the concrete of every missed shot and every early morning session. I was 20 years old. 20 and aimless, telling myself that taking a semester off was temporary, that I'd go back, that this gap year was just that, a year. Except the year had stretched into 18 months, and every time I thought about filling out readmission paperwork, something in my chest locked up like a seized engine. So I stayed. Taught kids how to pivot. Showed up every day at the gym on Santa Monica Boulevard and pretended that was enough. It was enough until she walked in. I'd seen her before, always in the observation gallery above the court, sitting in the second row of metal bleachers with her laptop open, typing something, occasionally glancing down at Marcus. Sometimes she wore a silk blouse the color of aged wine. Sometimes a cashmere sweater that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent. She was the kind of woman other people noticed, tall, dark-haired, with cheekbones that caught the overhead lights and a posture that spoke of boardrooms and private Pilates. But she never came down to the court. Never lingered. Just watched her son, typed her emails, and left. That Wednesday afternoon in late October, she came down. Tyler, right. She extended her hand. Her grip was firm, warm, her manicured nails grazing my palm. Vanessa Chun. Marcus's mother. I wanted to introduce myself properly. Yeah, of course. Mrs. Chen. I wiped my free hand on my training short. I was still in my practice polo, damp at the collar, and shook her hand again, properly this time. Marcus is doing great. Really coming along. She smiled. It transformed her face, softened the boardroom sharpness into something luminous. He's been talking about you at home. Says you're the only coach who actually explains why he should do things, not just bark orders. She tilted her head. He said you played at USC? Played. Past tense. I shrugged, aiming for casual and probably missing. Didn't work out. Youth is wasted on the young, she said, and there was something in the way she said it, a weight, a pause, that made me look at her twice. Not just a polite observation from a suburban mom. Something else. Anyway, I wanted to thank you. Richard and I, we both travel a lot for work, and Marcus needs male influence. Someone who actually knows the game and can push him. Where does your husband travel? I asked, before I could stop myself. All over. She glanced up at the gallery, then back at me, and for a half-second the mask slipped, just a flicker of something tired and lonely behind those bright eyes. He runs a supply chain consulting firm. He's in Singapore this week, Shanghai next. We're lucky if he's home 2 weeks a month. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Something about the way she said lucky, the flatness of it, made my chest tighten in a way I didn't understand yet. She recovered instantly, that boardroom composure snapping back into place like a window shade. Well, he's dedicated to his career. Can't complain. She gathered her laptop bag from the bleacher seat. I'll let you get back to it. Marcus, 5 more minutes on that cone drill, okay? I need to make a call. She climbed back up to the gallery without looking at me again. But I looked at her. I watched her settle into the same metal seat, open her laptop, and I thought about Singapore and Shanghai and a husband who was never home, and something about the geometry of that. A beautiful woman alone in a big house in Brentwood while her husband mapped out logistics across the Pacific, settled into my brain like a splinter. I couldn't get it out. Weeks passed. Marcus improved steadily, his footwork tightening, his jumper developing a reliable arc. I noticed things. That's what I told myself anyway. I noticed that Vanessa always arrived 15 minutes before the end of each session, as if she'd scheduled her day around those few moments. I noticed that she started bringing 2 coffees to the gallery instead of 1. I noticed the way she leaned forward on the bleacher when I demonstrated a move, elbows on her knees, chin resting in her hand. I noticed the wedding ring on her left hand. I noticed when she twisted it, slowly, unconsciously, during long phone calls that she took outside the gym, her voice low and controlled in that particular way people speak when they're trying not to argue. One Friday, she stayed behind. Tyler. She caught me as I was loading mesh bags of basketballs onto a cart. I wanted to ask you something. Yeah? I straightened. My polo was soaked through. She was wearing a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse, like she'd come straight from a meeting. She always looked like she'd come straight from somewhere important. Richard's company is hosting a client dinner next Saturday. A whole thing at the Langham. I need to schmooze, and Marcus has a birthday party that night. She paused, and something shifted in her expression, a small hesitation, like she was stepping off a cliff. Would you be willing to take Marcus for the evening? A few hours at our place? I'd pay you, of course. My rate is $40 an hour, I said, before my brain caught up with my mouth. Then I felt like an idiot. She'd just asked me to babysit, and I'd turned it into a negotiation. She laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one, sudden and unguarded, that changed the whole temperature of the conversation. Fair enough. Say 6 hours? Deal. I tried to sound casual. I'll come to your place, then. I'll text you the address. She was already walking backward toward the parking lot, her heels clicking on the concrete. And Tyler? We're something nicer than that polo. I looked down at my polo. It said Pacific Rim Basketball in orange letters across the chest. I'll try, I said. She smiled, that luminous thing again, and turned and walked away. The Chin House was in the upper reaches of Brentwood, up past San Vicente, where the streets widened and the houses stopped trying to prove anything and just quietly exuded wealth. The kind of neighborhood where the trees were old enough to have opinions and the driveways held cars that cost more than the houses I grew up in. I pulled up in my 11-year-old Honda Civic. The paint was peeling near the wheel wells and the radio made a sound like a dying animal at high volumes, and felt the familiar sting of not belonging. Vanessa answered the door in an emerald green dress that made my brain short-circuit for a full 2 seconds. Her hair was pinned up, her earrings were small diamonds that caught the entryway light, and she was wearing heels that added 3 inches to her height. She looked like she belonged on the arm of someone whose last name came with a Roman numeral. You clean up nice, she said, looking me over. I was wearing dark jeans and a button-down I'd ironed 3 times because I kept messing up the collar. I'd even put product in my hair, which I never did, and it made my head feel like a helmet. So do you, I said, which was the single greatest understatement of my 20 years on this earth. Marcus appeared behind her, wearing a polo that actually fit him. Tyler. Mom said you might teach me some new moves. I'll teach you whatever you want, I said, cropping to his eye level. But first, go get changed into something you can sweat in. We're going to use the whole court. He took off down the hallway like his shoes were on fire. Vanessa and I stood there. The house was enormous and silent, all high ceilings and muted earth tones and furniture that looked like it had been chosen by a professional rather than a person who actually lived there. It was beautiful and completely cold, like a magazine spread pretending to be a home. "Richard's driver will pick me up at 7:30, she said. "I'll be back by midnight, latest. There's food in the kitchen, please help yourself. The Wi-Fi password is on the fridge. And Marcus's bedtime is 9, no matter what he says." "He's a good kid," I said. "I know." She pulled her clutch from the console table by the door and checked her phone. "He's the best thing that ever happened to me." She looked up at me, and the light in the entryway caught the edge of her cheekbone, the curve of her jaw. "Everything else isn't negotiable." I didn't know what to say to that. The door closed behind her, and I heard her heels click down the driveway, and then the soft purr of an engine pulling away, and then nothing but the house settling around me and Marcus's footsteps thundering back down the hallway. We spent 3 hours on the outdoor court. The Chins had a half-court in their backyard, regulation hoops, a smooth concrete surface, landscape lighting that made it look like a place where serious basketball was played regularly. Marcus worked hard. He listened. He asked questions. For a 13-year-old, he had an unusual capacity to absorb instruction without ego, which meant he was going to be genuinely good if he kept this up. At 8:30, we went inside. I made him a sandwich, turkey, Swiss, everything on sourdough, and he sat at the kitchen island and told me about his friends at school and whether he thought the Lakers would ever be good again. He was funny, this kid. Self-deprecating in a way that reminded me, oddly, of his mother. "My mom looks tired a lot," Marcus said, out of nowhere, mid-bite. I looked at him. "Yeah? She says it's because of work. But I think it's because Dad's not here." He chewed thoughtfully. "She pretends everything's fine. But she's not fine. She just doesn't say it." I didn't know what to say to that either. "Mrs. Peterson says I have an old soul," Marcus continued. "I think she means I'm annoying." I laughed. "She means you're paying attention. That's a good thing." "Being paying attention is also annoying," he said, and I couldn't argue with that. At 9, Marcus went upstairs. I heard his door close, then the faint sound of him talking to someone on a video game headset, multiplayer with friends, probably the universal language of 13-year-old boys. I wandered into the living room and stood at the window and looked out at the Brentwood night. The pool was lit from below, glowing a pale teal. The backyard was immaculate. Everything about this house was immaculate, and the word didn't just describe the cleanliness. It described the careful arrangement of a life that looked perfect from the outside and, I suspected, felt like a set on a soundstage from the inside. My phone buzzed. "Vanessa, how's my son?" Me, being paid attention to. "He's annoying and great." Me, also he ate 2 sandwiches and is now gaming with friends. "Vanessa, ha. Thank you. Really. You have no idea." Me, no idea about what? "Vanessa, never mind. I'll be home by midnight." Me, drive safe. "Vanessa, you're sweet. Don't let that be a weakness." I stared at that last message for a long time. At 11:40, I heard a car in the driveway. Not the soft purr of the driver returning. Something quicker, more urgent. Then the front door and Vanessa's heels, but unsteady. Click, 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 a rhythm I didn't recognize. Not the confident clip of the woman who'd left 3 hours ago. She appeared in the living room doorway. Her dress was the same emerald green. Her makeup was mostly intact. But something was wrong. Her eyes were glassy, her cheeks flushed, and when she saw me standing by the window, she stopped in the doorway like she'd walked into a wall. "You're still here," she said. "You said midnight." I did. She set her clutch on the console table. missed. It fell and spilled its contents across the marble. Lipstick, phone, a hotel key card, tissues. She stared at the mess without moving. I did say midnight. Vanessa. I crossed the room and crouched and started collecting her things. The hotel key card was from the Langham. The lipstick was MAC, some deep shade I didn't know the name of. Her phone screen was cracked in the corner, new crack. She dropped it, probably, coming in. I dropped my phone, she said, as if reading my thoughts. I see that. I held it out to her. She took it. Our fingers touched. She didn't pull away. He's charming, she said, of her husband. That's what everyone says. Richard Chin is so charming. He builds supply chains and closes deals and tells the right jokes at the right time, and everyone loves him. She was speaking to the air, to the ceiling, to something past me. And I sit next to him at these dinners, and I smile and I nod, and I am the most beautiful, well-maintained, perfectly dressed accessory to his charm. You don't have to do that, I said. I do. Because that's the deal. That's what I signed up for. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. Not quite. I was 22 when I married him. I thought charm was the same thing as love. I thought the lifestyle was the same thing as happiness. And now I'm 34, and my son has an old soul, and my husband is in Singapore again next week, and I am standing in my living room at midnight talking to my son's basketball coach like he's a therapist. I'm not a therapist, I said. I know. She smiled. It was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. That's what makes this okay. Does it make it okay? Tyler. She said my name like it was something she was turning over in her hands. How old are you? 20. And I'm 34. And my husband makes more in a month than your car is worth. And you work at a basketball academy that smelled like athletic tape and teenage anxiety. And none of this makes any sense. She took her clutch from me. I'd somehow collected all her things without standing up, and she walked past me toward the hallway. Good night, Tyler. Thank you for watching, Marcus. I'll Venmo you. That's not why I'm asking for the money, I said, and immediately wished I hadn't. She stopped. Turned. The hallway behind her was dark except for the ambient glow of a recessed light. Then why are you asking for the money? She said. I didn't have an answer. Not a real one. I asked for the money because I needed it. Because I was 20 and broke and I drove a Honda Civic with peeling paint. Because nothing about my life and her life overlapped in any way that made sense, and the money was a tether, a reason, something concrete in a conversation that was dissolving into the Brentwood night like sugar in hot water. But that wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that I wanted to see her again, and the only acceptable framework I had for that was professional. She was my client's mother. I taught her son basketball. That was the structure, and structures kept things from collapsing. Because I'm broke, I said. Honest, at least. She laughed. That real laugh, the one that changed her whole face. So are most people who look like they aren't. Welcome to my world, Tyler. She went upstairs. I heard her door close. I sat on the couch in the dark living room and listened to the house breathe and thought about charm and love in the distance between those two words, which I was beginning to suspect was immeasurable. I went back to the Chin house every week. Not for Marcus, though Marcus was part of it, but because somewhere in the space between the third and fourth session, the thing that was happening between Vanessa and me stopped being about basketball and started being about something else entirely. She started staying late. Not every time, but often enough that I noticed. She'd come down from the gallery before the session ended and she'd watch from courtside, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, and when the last kid was picked up, she'd just be there. Still leaning against the wall. Still watching me roll the mesh bags of basketballs onto the cart. still present in a way that felt like an invitation. We talked about Marcus, about my short-lived college career. She asked once why I'd left USC, and I gave her the sanitized version. Personal reasons, needed a break, hadn't gone back yet. She didn't push. That was one of the things I noticed about her. She created space for people to not say things. One night, late November, she suggested we get late-night food after a session. I said yes before she finished the sentence. We went to a diner on Pico, the kind of place that had been there since the 60s and still served coffee in ceramic mugs with the restaurant's logo worn half off. It was nearly 10 o'clock. We sat in a booth by the window and she ordered pancakes and I ordered eggs and hash browns, and we talked for 2 hours about nothing and everything. She told me about growing up in San Marino, private schools, ballet lessons, the particular pressure of being a beautiful daughter in a family that measured worth in credentials and connections. She'd gone to Pepperdine for business, graduated magna cum laude, and been recruited straight into a consulting firm where she'd met Richard at a company retreat in Napa. He'd been 34 then. She'd been 28. He'd charmed her the way he charmed everyone, with attention, with promises, with the performance of being the person she needed him to be. Did you love him? I asked. She turned her coffee mug in her hands. I thought I did. I thought what I felt was love because it felt like certainty. He was sure about me. He wanted me. And at 28, after a few mediocre relationships and a career that was all ambition and no soul, certainty felt like the most romantic thing in the world. And now? Now I know the difference between certainty and security. Richard gave me security. A house and a school district and a tennis club membership and a husband whose face is on the wall of his firm's lobby. But certainty? She looked at me. Certainty is when someone looks at you and sees the person you're afraid you might be and doesn't flinch. My heart was doing something structural, like a building shifting on its foundation. That's a high bar, I said. I'm a high-maintenance woman, Tyler. Did you not get that from the cashmere sweaters? I smiled. I got it from the fact that you corrected my stance on the cone drill. She laughed. I was trying to help. Marcus doesn't need help. Marcus needs to learn how to trust his instincts. If you correct everything, he'll become a perfectionist who can't play without a coach in his ear. I know. She cut her pancakes with surgical precision. I'm trying to correct the correction. It's hard when your whole life has been about getting it right. Who says you got it wrong? She put her fork down. I'm at a dinner party in the Langham and my husband is holding court across the table, and I'm thinking about whether my son's basketball coach is going to text me back after I sent him a picture of the dessert we didn't serve, and whether that makes me a terrible person. It doesn't, I said immediately. You don't know that. Yes, I do. You're not a terrible person, Vanessa. You're a person who's been alone in a beautiful house for a long time, and you're allowed to want things that aren't terrible. What if the thing I want isn't just a thing? She was looking at me directly now, her eyes dark in the diner's low light. What if the thing I want is a 20-year-old boy who smells like Gatorade and athletic Tate and who looks at me like I'm a person and not a role? Nobody had ever looked at me like that was a problem. That could be terrible, I admitted. It could be. She picked up her fork again. But it could also be the first true thing that's happened to me in years. We finished our food in silence. She paid because she'd insisted on paying, because she always insisted on paying. Another structure, another frame that kept the thing we were doing from looking like what it actually was. I walked her to her car. It was a black Mercedes G-Wagon that probably cost more than my entire existence. She unlocked it but didn't get in. Tyler. Yeah. What are we doing? I didn't have an answer. So I told her the truth instead. I don't know. But I keep coming back. She got in the car. She rolled down the window. She reached out and touched my wrist, just her fingertips, light as a moth landing, and then she pulled away into the Brentwood night, and I stood in the parking lot of a diner on Pico and felt like something had shifted irreversibly inside me. December came, and Los Angeles pretended it was autumn, which meant the temperature dropped to 68 degrees and everyone broke out their cashmere. The Chin's backyard court became our unofficial meeting place. I'd come by on Saturday mornings, ostensibly for extra practice with Marcus, though Marcus had started sleeping in until 10, which Vanessa and I both understood was his 13-year-old way of giving us space. We sat by the pool. We talked. Sometimes she showed me pictures on her phone, not of herself, though occasionally she did that too, swiping past a candid shot and saying that's not a good one without it actually being a bad one, but of Marcus as a baby, as a toddler, as a kid in his first team photo with a grin that was missing 2 front teeth. She showed me wedding photos. Her in a white gown, Richard in a charcoal suit, both of them smiling with the unearned confidence of people who'd never been tested by time. She showed me just eggs and pecorino and guanciale that she'd sourced from some Italian market in West Hollywood. We sat at the kitchen island and ate, and Marcus sat across from us drawing something on his tablet, occasionally interjecting with commentary about a video game he'd been playing. "Mom, Tyler said something at practice yesterday that was actually smart." "Only actually smart?" Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Well, most of what he says is just coach stuff. You know, power through, stay low, boring things." Marcus didn't look up from his drawing. "But yesterday he said that the most important shot in basketball is the one you're scared to take." "That's kind of deep." "Is it?" Vanessa looked at me. "It's not," I said. "It's what you say when you want a 13-year-old to stop being afraid of the three-point line." "It worked, though," Marcus said, with the unbothered logic of a teenager. "I made 4 of them in a row after you said that." "See?" Vanessa pointed her fork at me. "Deep." That afternoon, after Marcus went to his room, Vanessa and I stood in the kitchen and she washed dishes and I dried them, and neither of us said anything for a long time, which was becoming its own form of conversation. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full of things neither of us was ready to name. "Can I ask you something?" she said, not looking at me. "Always. If you could go back to USA, if everything that happened didn't happen, would you?" I set down the dish towel. "I don't know. I left because I was drowning. Not in basketball. In everything. I felt like I was playing a version of myself that someone had written for me, and every day I woke up and put on the costume and walked onto the court, and it was fine. It was good. People said I was talented, and I wanted to scream." "Why didn't you?" "Because screaming feels like failure. And I was 18 and I thought failure was the worst thing." She turned off the water, turned to face me. Her hands were wet, dripping onto the marble floor, and she didn't wipe them. "What do you think now?" "Now I think that staying in a life that doesn't fit is a slower, quieter failure. And it's worse because it looks like success from the outside." She stared at me. I stared back. "Tyler," she said, "I think you're the bravest person I know. I'm a college dropout who teaches kids basketball. And you're braver than anyone at that dinner table at the Langham. Than anyone at my firm's holiday party. Then my husband, who has never once in his life done something that scared him, because he calculates every risk before he takes it and calls that courage." She stepped closer. "You're here. With me. In my kitchen. And that scares you. And you're here anyway." My heart was doing the structural thing again. "It terrifies me." "Good." She reached up and touched my face. Not my wrist this time. My actual face, her palm against my cheek, her thumb resting on the bone beneath my eye. I was taller than her by 4 inches, and she was looking up at me, and the kitchen was very quiet. It should terrify you. Because this is terrifying. What I'm doing. What we're doing. And I'm not the kind of woman who does terrifying things. I'm the kind who plans and manages and mitigates. But here I am. Here you are, I said. She dropped her hand, stepped back, went back to the dishes. And I stood there and felt like the ground had shifted 4 inches to the left and the world was still turning, but everything in it was in a different position than it had been 5 minutes ago. On Christmas Eve, she texted me at 11 p.m. Vanessa, Richard is in Hong Kong. Marcus is asleep. I'm sitting by the pool. Me doing what? Vanessa thinking. Me about? Vanessa about whether I'm going to do something I'll regret. Me define something. Vanessa, you. I read that message 3 times. My apartment was small and it smelled like the Ramenite microwave for dinner, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's television through them. And I was reading a text from a married woman in Brentwood who was sitting by her pool on Christmas Eve thinking about me, and everything about that sentence was absurd, and I wanted it more than I'd wanted anything in my life. Me, what would the regret version look like? Vanessa, the regret version is that I text you to come over and something happens that can't unhappen. Me, and the non-regret version? Vanessa, there isn't one. That's the problem. There's no version of this where I don't think about you. There's no version where I don't notice the way you run your hand through your hair when you're teaching. There's no version where I don't go to Marcus's practices and watch you and feel something I haven't felt in years, and that not regret version is still just a slower form of the same catastrophe. Me, so what do you want to do? Vanessa, I want you to come over. I put my phone down. I looked at my apartment, the unmade bed, the stack of textbooks I kept telling myself I'd return to the library, the framed photo on my dresser of me in a US ski jersey holding a regional championship trophy. I looked at the life I'd built since dropping out, which was a life of half measures and almost, and I thought about the fact that I was 20 years old and I had nothing to lose except my pride, and even that I wasn't sure I had much of left. Me, I'll be there in 30. I drove to Brentwood on Christmas Eve with the windows down because I needed the cold air to feel real. The streets were empty, everyone was home with their families, their Christmas trees lit, their children asleep, their lives arranged in the conventional way. I was driving against the current, toward a woman who was sitting by a pool in the dark, waiting for something she couldn't name. She was there when I arrived. The backyard was lit only by the pool's underwater lights, that same pale teal, and she was sitting on a lounger in a silk robe the color of champagne, and her hair was down. I'd never seen her hair down before. It fell past her shoulders in dark waves that caught the pool light and scattered it. "Merry Christmas," she said. "Merry Christmas," I said, and sat down next to her. We talked. We always talked. We talked about Marcus and about the academy and about the fact that she'd been to Paris 4 times and never once felt the romance everyone promised she'd feel there. We talked about her first car, a Volvo station wagon, the kind, with a cassette player and rust on the wheel well, and my first car, which was the same Honda Civic I drove now, inherited from my older brother when he upgraded. We talked about what we were afraid of. She was afraid of wasting more years. I was afraid of being nobody. We were both afraid of the same thing, wearing different masks. At some point, she stopped talking. I stopped talking. The pool made its quiet underwater sound. The December air was cool but not cold, and her robe was thin, and she was close enough that I could smell her perfume, something warm and complicated, like sandalwood and something floral underneath it, something that made me think of rooms with the curtains drawn. She kissed me first. Not on the cheek. Not a careful, measured thing with plausible deniability built into every millimeter. She turned toward me and she put her hand on the back of my neck and she kissed me on the mouth, and her lips were warm and she tasted like red wine and she kissed me like she meant it, which I understood was the most dangerous thing about her. I kissed her back. I kissed her back and I put my hand on her waist, over the silk of her robe, and I felt the curve of her body through the thin fabric, and she pulled me closer, and the pool lights shifted under the water, and the world contracted to the space between her mouth and mine. When we broke apart, she was breathing hard. So was I. That can't happen again, she said. I touched her face. You're right. I mean it. I know you do. She closed her eyes. I haven't felt like this in, I don't even know. Richard and I, we have a relationship. It's functional. It's based on mutual respect and shared logistics and a child we both love. But it hasn't felt like this in so long that I'd forgotten what this felt like. What does it feel like? Like being 20 again. Like being someone who doesn't know yet that the world will ask her to be smaller than she is. She opened her eyes. They were bright and wet and fierce. You're 20. You don't know yet what you're going to be. And I do know, I've known for years, and I hate it. And you make me hate it less. I kissed her again. This time it was my turn to reach. I leaned in and I cupped her face in both hands and I kissed her the way I'd wanted to kiss her since the first time she came down from the gallery and introduced herself, which was months ago, which felt like another lifetime. When I pulled back, she was crying. Not sobbing. Just tears running silently down her cheeks, catching the pool light. I'm going to ruin your life, she said. No, you're not. I am. I'm married. I have a house in Brentwood and a husband who provides and a son who needs stability. And you're 20 years old and you should be figuring out your own life, not being the secret that a rich woman keeps by her pool on Christmas Eve. You're not a rich woman keeping a secret. You're a person who's been alone for a very long time, and you kissed me because you wanted to, and that's not something to be ashamed of. You say that because you're 20 and you don't understand what this costs. Tell me what it costs. She shook her head. I can't, because if I say it out loud, it becomes real. And I'm not ready for it to be real. I'm not ready for any of this to be real. I didn't push. I sat with her by the pool until 2 in the morning, and we talked about smaller things, Marcus's new video game, the renovation she'd been planning for the kitchen, a restaurant on the west side that a colleague had recommended. Safe things. Small talks. The conversation of people who were trying to pretend the last few hours hadn't changed the geography of their lives. When I left, she walked me to the door. We stood in the entryway, the same entryway where she'd told me to wear something nicer than my polo, weeks ago, and she pressed her forehead against my chest, just for a moment, just to feel the weight of something solid. Tyler. Yeah. I'm not going to stop. I pulled back and looked at her. I wasn't going to ask you to. I know. That's why I needed to say it. She went upstairs. I heard her door close. I drove home in the same car with the same peeling paint, and I felt like a different person than the one who'd made this drive 6 hours ago. Not better. Not worse. Just different. Like a room where someone had moved all the furniture 2 inches to the left. January. The new year, the same life. I went back to the academy. Vanessa came to Marcus's practices. Every glance was loaded. Every accidental touch sent something electric through my nervous system. She would lean over to adjust Marcus's stance and her arm would brush mine and we would both pretend it was nothing, and it was nothing, it was an accident, except that the air in the gym felt different when she was in it, thicker, like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. We started having late-night dinners again. The diner on Pico became our place. We kept the same booth by the window, and the waiter, a tired-looking guy in his 50s named Sal who'd been working there since the Carter administration, started setting aside the same table for us every Friday without us asking. She told me things she hadn't told anyone. About the year she'd almost left Richard 5 years ago, when Marcus was 8, and she'd found a text on his phone from a woman in his contacts named Diane Drinks. She'd confronted him. He'd explained it away, a colleague, a misunderstanding, a world of plausible deniability that she didn't have the energy to fight through because she was exhausted and he was her husband, and what was the alternative? Break up a family over a name and a phone? She stayed. She stayed, and she filed the incident away in a drawer in her mind, and she never opened that drawer again, and the marriage continued in its functional, airless way. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you should know who he is, what this marriage is, so that when, if something happens, you understand why. Vanessa, I need you to understand that I'm not a victim. I made choices. I stayed for security. I told myself that wanting more was childish. And now here I am, wanting more, and it's the most childish and the most right thing I've ever done." She was sitting across from me in the booth, her elbows on the Formica table, her chin in her hands. The diner lights were yellow and forgiving. She was wearing no makeup. I was beginning to learn that this was a kind of intimacy, a level of armor she only removed in certain contexts, and she looked younger. Not young, but younger. Like the woman she might have been if she'd had more time to figure out who she was before the world told her who to be. "I'm not going to pretend I understand the complexity of your marriage," I said. "But I know what I feel when I'm with you. And I'm not a kid. I'm 20. I'm not some college freshman who doesn't know what he's doing. I know exactly what I'm doing." "What are you doing, Tyler?" "I'm falling in love with you. And I know that's a problem. I know it's a whole series of problems." The other thing is not going to change anything. The first thing is what's real. It changes everything for me, she said. It changes what this is. This isn't a late-night diner conversation anymore. This isn't a flirtation. This is a fact. And facts have weight. So does what I feel. She smiled. It was tired and sad and beautiful, all at once. We're in so much trouble. I know. We really are. We finished our coffee. Sal refilled our cups without asking. Outside, the Los Angeles night was doing what Los Angeles nights do, warm and indifferent, the palm trees silhouetted against a purple sky, the city humming along in its sprawling, careless way, oblivious to the small, enormous thing happening in a booth by the window. February. Marcus turned 14. Vanessa asked me to come to his birthday dinner, a small thing, just family, a table at a restaurant in Santa Monica that Marcus had chosen because it had good milkshakes. Richard was supposed to be there. This was the first time I would meet him. I agonized over what to wear. I agonized in the way that people agonize when they're trying to appear as though they aren't agonizing. Too casual and you look disreputable. Too formal and you look like you're trying too hard. I settled on dark jeans and a navy button-down and the kind of leather jacket that suggested cool without screaming it. I wanted Vanessa to look at me and feel proud, and I hated that that mattered to me, and it mattered to me anyway. Richard Chin was tall, trim, early 40s, with the kind of maintained appearance that spoke of regular golf and a personal trainer and a dermatologist. He had a firm handshake and a wide smile, and he looked me in the eye when we spoke, which I respected, even as I understood that this man had no idea that his wife's hand had rested on my neck by a swimming pool on Christmas Eve. "So you're the famous Tyler," he said, settling into his chair at the restaurant. "Marcus won't stop talking about you. Says you're the only coach who's actually made a difference." "I just show up," I said. "He does the work." Modest. Good quality in a young man. He ordered a scotch. Vanessa tells me you played at USC. What happened there? Derek, Vanessa said, before I could answer. We talked about this. Just making conversation, sweetheart. He turned to me, still smiling. So what happened at USC? I left. Why? I looked at Vanessa. She was looking at her water glass. Because it wasn't the right fit, I said. Fit is important, Richard said, with the air of a man who dispensed wisdom for a living. He was a consultant, after all. It was literally his job to tell other companies how to run themselves. I consult with companies on supply chain optimization, and the number one problem I see is people staying in roles that don't fit them. They think loyalty is the same as staying. It's not. It's actually the opposite. Staying in the wrong thing is disloyal to yourself, to your organization, to everyone involved. He said this with such conviction, such absolute confidence, that for a moment I wondered if he was doing it on purpose. If he knew. If this was some kind of test. But no, the look in his eyes was genuine. He believed what he was saying. He believed he was a man of integrity and insight, and he had no idea that the 20-year-old basketball coach sitting across from him was the most significant threat his marriage had ever faced. That's good advice, I said. It's lived experience, Richard said. I left my first firm at 31. Everyone thought I was crazy. Now that firm is half the size it was, and I'm running a global consultancy. Timing matters. Knowing when to walk away matters. After dinner, Richard shook my hand again. Take care of my boy, he said. He's in good hands with you. I watched them drive away, Richard in the driver's seat, Vanessa beside him, Marcus in the back with his earbuds in, and I stood in the restaurant parking lot and thought about supply chains and loyalty and the terrible irony of a man who optimized other people's inefficiencies being completely blind to his own. The next day, Vanessa texted me. Vanessa, thank you for last night. Me, for what? Vanessa, for being who you are. For not making it weird. For being kind to Richard even though. Me, even though? Vanessa, you know even though. Me, I don't know anything except that you're the most interesting person I've ever met and your son is going to be a better man than most adults I know. Vanessa, God, Tyler. You can't just say things like that. Me, why not? Vanessa, because they make me want to do things I shouldn't do. Me, like? Vanessa, like leave my husband on a Tuesday afternoon and drive to wherever you are and not come back. Me, where am I? Vanessa, that's the problem. You could be anywhere. You're 20. Your whole life is ahead of you. And I'm sitting in my kitchen in Brentwood texting a 20-year-old boy like he's the answer to a question I asked 20 years ago. Me, what question? Vanessa, whether love actually exists or whether it's just a story we tell ourselves to make the passage of time bearable. Me, and what's the answer? Vanessa, I think you might be the answer. And that's the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me. I put my phone down and I lay on my bed and I stared at the ceiling and I thought about her, Vanessa in her kitchen in Brentwood, Vanessa by her pool in December, Vanessa in the diner by the window, and I thought about the fact that I had become, without intending to, without planning to, the answer to someone's question. Not just anyone's question. Hers. And the weight of that settled into my chest like something permanent. March. Spring training. The academy ran extended hours, which meant I was at the gym 6 days a week, which meant I saw Marcus, and by extension, Vanessa, less often, and the deprivation of that was its own kind of torture. We talked on the phone. Late at night, after Richard went to sleep, or after he claimed to, which was a different thing entirely. She would call me from her walk-in closet, sitting on the floor surrounded by shoes and handbags and the trappings of a life she was quietly suffocating in. And she would talk to me in a voice stripped of everything but the raw material of who she actually was. She told me about the first time she'd felt beautiful, She was 16 at a school dance, wearing a green dress that she'd picked out herself. A boy named Daniel had asked her to dance, and she'd said yes, and for 3 minutes and 47 seconds, she'd counted. She'd felt like the center of a universe that made sense. Daniel was forgettable. The moment was not. "That's what you do to me," she said, on the phone at midnight, in her closet, a world away from her husband. "You make me feel like Daniel asked me to dance." I didn't know what to say to that. I was 20 years old and I was on the phone with a woman who was sitting in a walk-in closet full of things that cost more than my education, and she was telling me that I made her feel like she was 16 and at a school dance, and I didn't have the language for the enormity of that. "I don't want to be a mistake," I said. "You're not a mistake." Her voice was fierce. "You're the opposite of a mistake. You're the first right thing in 20 years of wrong things. Then why does it feel like we can't have this?" "Because we can have it. That's what's so cruel. We can have it. That's the most brutal part. It's not impossible. It's not forbidden by law or nature or any force larger than ourselves. We could simply decide. We could walk away from everything that's expected and do the thing that's real." She was quiet for a moment. "But I have Marcus. And you have a life you're trying to build. And Richard has his supply chains and his consulting firm and his reputation. And none of us are bad people, Tyler. That's the worst part. We're just people who made choices that didn't fit, and now we're all trapped in the shape of those choices, and none of us know how to break the mold without breaking everything else. Then maybe we shouldn't break it." I heard her breathing. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know what I want. I want to be with you. I want to not feel like I'm doing something wrong every time I see you. I want to stop counting the hours until the next time I can hear your voice. I want to be able to look at you in a room without everyone knowing that something is happening between us that isn't supposed to be happening. So what do? We keep doing this. We keep showing up. We keep being honest with each other, even when it's terrible. And maybe someday, I don't know, maybe someday the structure will change. Maybe Richard will find out and leave. Maybe Marcus will grow up and understand. Maybe I'll finish my degree and become someone who fits in your world instead of someone who just parks his Honda Civic outside it. Tyler." Her voice was soft. "Don't finish your degree for me. Don't become someone for me. That's the one thing I will not allow. Then what do you want me to become? I want you to become yourself. Whoever that is. Wherever that takes you. I want you to find that person, not because of me, not for me, but because you're worth it. And if that person happens to be someone who loves me, then I'll be here. And if that person turns out to be someone who leaves all of this behind and becomes a professional player or a coach at a Division I school or a marine biologist or whatever the hell you actually want to be, then I'll be happy for you. Even if it means I lose you." I closed my eyes. "I don't want to lose you." "Then don't. But don't lose yourself either. That's the one thing I know for certain. I'd rather have a piece of you that's real than all of you that's borrowed from who you're pretending to be." April. The academy entered tournament season. I was on the road most weekends, driving to Phoenix, to San Jose, to Las Vegas, with a van full of teenage basketball players and equipment and the particular exhaustion of a life that was full but not full in the way I wanted. We texted. Of course we texted. Every morning, every night. Small things, daily things, a photo of the Phoenix sunrise from the parking lot of a gym, a text about Marcus's geometry grade, a late-night message that said nothing but "thinking of you" that I read 4 times before I could form a coherent thought. Richard was traveling less. This was the thing that changed the geometry. In March, his firm lost a major client, something about a logistics breakdown in Rotterdam that cost the client 8 figures and cost Richard's firm its reputation with that segment of the industry. He was home more. Suddenly the house that was always empty was full, and the space that Vanessa and I had been quietly colonizing, The late-night conversations, the diner booth, the pool at midnight, contracted to almost nothing. She told me about it in the diner, which was still our place, though now we met there on weekday afternoons instead of late nights, during the hours when Richard was at his reduced client meetings and Marcus was at school. "He's home more," she said, stirring her coffee. "And I should be glad. Everyone keeps telling me I should be glad my husband is home more. My mother says I should be grateful. My friends say we should use this time to reconnect, to work on the marriage, to do the couples therapy we've been talking about for years. Aren't you?" "I'm terrified." She looked at me. "Because the more he's home, the more I realize how gone he already is. He's here in the house, but he's not here. He sits at the dinner table and he's on his phone. He watches television and he's checking email. He goes to bed at 11 and he's asleep before his head hits the pillow. Being home more doesn't mean he's more present. It just means there's more of his absence to go around. Is that why you haven't done the couples therapy?" I asked him about it once. He said he didn't think we needed it, that we had a good marriage, that we should count our blessings. She laughed, a hollow sound. Count our blessings. I love that phrase. It's what you say when you want someone to stop talking about what they need. I reached across the table and took her hand. We were in public. Sal was 3 feet away, wiping down the counter, and I didn't care. I put my hand on top of hers and I held it, and she held mine back, and we sat like that while the afternoon light shifted through the diner window. "What do you need?" I asked. "I need you to tell me this is real." "It is real." "Say it like you mean it." "I mean it. This is real. You are real. What I feel for you is the realest thing in my life." She squeezed my hand. Her eyes were bright. "Tyler, I need to tell you something." "Tell me." "I've been thinking about leaving him." She said it quietly, without drama, the way she'd say, "I've been thinking about trying that new restaurant. I've been thinking about it for months. But now I'm actually thinking about it." "Like, specifically? Like, what would it look like? What would I take? Where would Marcus go to school? How would I support myself? I have money. I have my own career. I've been building something parallel to Richard's life for years, and he doesn't even know it because he doesn't look at me closely enough to see it." "What would you tell Marcus?" "That his mother and father love him more than anything in the world, and that sometimes people who love each other can't live together, and that it's not his fault, and that we'll figure it out." "And Richard?" Her expression shifted. Something harder entered her eyes. "Richard would make it ugly. He's not a bad man, but he has a reputation and a brand and a life that he curates, and a divorce would be bad for his brand. He wouldn't hurt Marcus. I don't think he's capable of that, even if he doesn't know how to love his son the way a father should. But he would hurt me. He would make it expensive. He would make it long. He would make me prove that I deserve to walk away from everything he built. You don't need his permission to leave. I know. Legally. Emotionally, it's different. 20 years of a life has its own gravity. It pulls you back even when you want to go forward. So what do you want from me?" She looked at me, really looked, the way she did when she was deciding whether to say the next thing. "I want you to tell me that if I leave him, there will be a place for me in your life. Not as a scandal. Not as a secret. Not as the older woman who seduced a younger man. As a person. As someone you would actually choose if the circumstances were different." The circumstances were always different. That was the problem. The circumstances were always and forever the barrier between what we felt and what we could have. "If you leave him," I said, slowly, "then you'll be a 34-year-old woman who left her husband and has a 14-year-old son and has spent 20 years in a life that didn't fit her. And I'll be 21 in a few months, with no degree and a job at a basketball academy and a car that needs a new transmission. And we'll be two people who have nothing figured out. And I will choose you. I will choose that life. I will choose figuring it out together over having it figured out alone. She started crying. Sal looked up from the counter, concerned, and I raised a hand. I'm okay, we said. We're okay. I'm going to do it, she said. I'm going to tell him. When? Soon. Not today. Not tomorrow. But soon. I'm going to look at my husband and I'm going to tell him that I haven't been happy in years and that I want a divorce, and I'm going to watch his face, and I already know what he'll say, and then I'm going to start the worst and best thing I've ever done. I lifted her hand to my lips and kissed it, right there in the diner, in front of Sal and the yellow lights and the world. I'll be here, I said. Whenever you're ready. The end came on a Thursday. Not the way you'd expect. Not with a dramatic confrontation or a slammed door or a suitcase carried down the front steps. Vanessa told me about it later, in pieces, the way you tell someone about a car accident, in flashes, out of order, each detail landing with its own small impact. She'd told Richard after Marcus went to bed. They'd been sitting in the living room. She'd said the words, I want a divorce, and Richard had gone very still, the way men do when they're calculating rather than feeling. He'd asked her why. She'd said she hadn't been happy. He'd asked since when. She'd said for years. He'd asked why she hadn't said anything. She'd said she had, in ways he hadn't been able to hear. He hadn't screamed. He hadn't cried. He'd sat there in his leather armchair in his Brentwood living room and absorbed the information like a business problem. And then he'd said, I think we should sleep on this, and gone to bed in the guest room, and the next morning he was gone before she woke up. To the office, or so his assistant said, and he'd left a note on the kitchen counter that said, we need to talk about the terms. Terms. Even in the collapse of his marriage, it was about terms. Marcus knew by the weekend. Vanessa had sat him down, the three of them, actually, Richard included, though Richard spoke in the careful, coached language of a man who'd been to a single therapy session and absorbed exactly zero of it, and explained that Mommy and Daddy were going to live in different houses for a while, and that they both loved him more than anything, and that nothing about his life would change except the zip code of one of the houses. Marcus had taken it the way Marcus took everything, quietly, observantly, with those dark eyes that missed nothing. Can I still see Tyler? He'd asked. Richard had looked at Vanessa. Vanessa had looked at Richard. Of course, Vanessa said. Why would that change? Richard added, with a confidence that suggested he had no idea that Tyler was the reason any of this was happening. The divorce was filed in May. The settlement negotiations took 4 months, because Richard's lawyer was thorough and Richard was motivated by something that wasn't quite spite but lived in the same neighborhood. The house, the beautiful, cold, immaculate house in Brentwood, went on the market in July. Vanessa found a townhouse in Mar Vista, smaller, older, with a garden that needed work and a kitchen that actually looked like people cooked in it. She sent me a photo the day she signed the lease. Vanessa, my new kitchen. The photo showed a room with butcher block counters and a window that looked out onto a small backyard. There was a plant on the windowsill, something green and unglamorous, the kind of plant you bought at a hardware store, not a designer nursery. There was a coffee cup on the counter. It looked like a home. Me, it's perfect. Vanessa, it needs a lot of work. Me, good. You need something to do with your hands. Vanessa, what I need is for you to come over and tell me this is the right decision. Me, when? Vanessa, now. Tomorrow. Whenever you can. Me, tomorrow. I'll bring food. Vanessa, bring yourself. That's enough. Her townhouse in Mar Vista was nothing like the house in Brentwood. It was half the size, twice as warm. The walls were a soft white that made the rooms feel larger, and there were boxes everywhere, Vanessa's thing, years of a life being unpacked into a new configuration. Marcus had a room with a window that faced the street, and he'd already covered the walls with posters, basketball players, video game art, a map of California with pins where he'd traveled. I came on a Saturday afternoon with pad thai from a place in Venice that she didn't know about yet. She opened the door wearing jeans and a t-shirt, just a plain gray t-shirt, nothing designer, nothing that cost more than $30, and her hair was tied back, and she looked like a completely different person. Not a version of Vanessa Chin, wife and mother and boardroom presence. Just Vanessa. She hugged me at the door. Not the careful, measured hug of a woman with a husband who might notice. A real hug, the kind where someone wraps their arms around you and presses their face into your shoulder and breathes out. "I'm terrified," she said into my chest. "I know." "No, you don't. You're 21. You don't know yet what it costs to append everything. I'm here anyway." She pulled back and looked at me. "You are. You really are." I set the pad thai on the counter and she poured 2 glasses of water and we sat on the floor. The living room was still unfurnished, boxes stacked against the walls, and we ate noodles out of takeout containers, and she told me about the settlement. The terms. The things Richard had fought for and the things she'd walked away from. The car she'd taken, the investment she'd kept, the amount of time she'd negotiated for Marcus to be in her care. "He asked for joint custody," she said, chewing a piece of tofu. I was surprised. "I didn't think he wanted it." "Does he?" "I don't know. I think he wanted to want it. I think he wanted to be the kind of father who wanted joint custody. But Marcus spends every other weekend at his place and mostly plays video games while Richard takes calls from Singapore." She shrugged. "It's something. It's not nothing. And how are you?" She considered this. "I'm the kind of okay that comes after a thing you've been dreading. You know when you've been scared of going to the dentist, and you finally go, and the cavity isn't as bad as you thought, and you walk out and the sun is bright and you're fine? That's where I am. I'm in the parking lot of the dentist's office. The sun is bright. I'm fine. But I also know that the cavity is still in my mouth, and the work isn't over. That's a very Vanessa metaphor. I contain multitudes. Marcus came home from his father's at 6. He saw me on the couch. Vanessa had found 2 bar stools for the kitchen island, but I'd migrated to the couch, which was still wrapped in plastic from the delivery, and he lit up. "Tyler, did you bring your laptop?" "For what?" "Coach Derek said you're supposed to send him the scouting reports by Monday. You're going to show me how to do them, remember?" I looked at Vanessa. She raised her eyebrows. "He told me you'd say that," she said. Marcus spent an hour on my laptop while I walked him through the basics of court analytics. Nothing serious, just how to track a player's tendencies from film, which was actually more interesting than most teenagers found it because Marcus was, fundamentally, a person who paid attention. When he went to bed, his new room, his new bed, his new street, Vanessa and I sat on the plastic-wrapped couch and looked out at the Mar Vista night. There were no landscape lights. There was no pool. Just a small yard with a fig tree and a that needed mowing and a street light on the corner that buzzed faintly. "It's not Brentwood," she said. "It's better. You don't have to say that." "I know. That's why I'm saying it." She leaned into me. I put my arm around her. We sat like that for a long time, in the plastic-wrapped living room of a townhouse that smelled like cardboard and new paint and the possibility of something different. "When does this start?" I asked. "The real part. The part where we stop hiding and start living." "I don't know. I've never done this before. I was 22 when I married Richard. I've never had to date, never had to choose someone, never had to build something from scratch." She paused. "I've never loved someone who wasn't already part of my infrastructure. You're the first person I've chosen because I wanted to, not because it made sense. That makes it sound terrifying. It is terrifying. It's also the only thing that isn't terrifying, because at least it's real. I turned her face toward mine. She let me. I kissed her softly, slowly, the way I'd wanted to kiss her for over a year. She kissed me back, and the townhouse was quiet, and the streetlight buzzed, and somewhere down the block a dog barked twice and went silent. I'm going to figure out my life, I said. I'm going to go back to school. Or I'm going to find something else. I'm going to become someone who deserves to be sitting on this couch with you. You already deserve it. Then I'm going to become someone who knows he deserves it. She smiled. In the dim light of the uncovered lamp, she looked like herself. Not Vanessa Chin in emerald green with diamonds in her ears. Just Vanessa in a Mar Vista townhouse, in love with a 21-year-old boy who drove a Honda Civic with peeling paint. Tyler. Yeah. Welcome home. I drove home that night on the 10 with the windows down, and the city was sprawling and alive and indifferent, and I felt like something had finally clicked into place, not perfectly, not cleanly, but in the way that things click when they were always supposed to fit together and just needed the right pressure applied at the right moment. I was 21. She was 34. I had no degree and a job that paid $12 an hour and a car that made sounds like a dying animal at high speeds. She had a townhouse in Mar Vista and a 14-year-old son and a fresh scar where her marriage used to be. And none of it made sense by any metric that the world applied to people our age. She was supposed to be with someone her own age, someone established, someone whose life had shape and direction. I was supposed to be with someone my own age, someone uncomplicated, someone who didn't come with a custody arrangement and a therapist's bill and a box of divorce papers in her briefcase. But we weren't supposed to be anything, the two of us. We were an exception. We were the thing that happened when two people decided that the conventional thing was less real than the true thing, and they chose the truth over the convention, and they held on to each other while the world told them they were wrong. Maybe it wouldn't last. Maybe the distance between our ages would become a chasm. Maybe Marcus would grow up and resent me. Maybe Richard would find out and do something ugly. Maybe the acorn of this life would grow into an oak, or maybe it would wither in its first dry season. I didn't know. I couldn't know. But I knew this. I was 21 years old, driving home on a Saturday night in Los Angeles, and I was in love with a woman who had chosen me, not because I was young and not because I was convenient, but because I was real, and I had chosen her back, and whatever came next, that part was true. And in a world where true things were becoming increasingly rare, true was enough. To be continued. Epilogue, 18 months later. The morning light came through the kitchen window at an angle that made everything look gilded. I was standing at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs, one for me, one for Vanessa, who was still in bed, which she claimed to hate but which I knew she secretly loved because it meant she got to wake up slowly, without anyone demanding anything of her for a few precious minutes. Marcus was in the backyard, shooting baskets on the portable hoop we'd installed 6 months ago. He'd grown 4 inches in the last year. He was 16 now, gangly and awkward in that way of boys who are still figuring out what their new height means for their coordination. He'd made JV this season, not starting 5, but on the bench, which he handled with the particular grace of a kid who'd learned that being good at something took time and that time was not an enemy. My phone buzzed. Coach Derek, texting from the academy. Derek, new client. Kids 12, Dad wants private sessions twice a week. You interested? Me, send me the details. Derek, you're the hardest worker I've got. How do you still not have a full roster? Me, some of us are still figuring out our lives. Derek, some of us figured out that years ago and it's boring. See you tomorrow. I set the phone down. Through the window, I could see Marcus miss a layup, then immediately rebound his own miss and put back a short jumper. He didn't get frustrated. That was the thing about him. He absorbed mistakes without ego, which meant he was going to be genuinely great if he kept this up. I'd gone back to USC in September. Not to play, my knee had decided, sometime in the 18 months since everything changed, that it was done with competitive basketball, but to finish what I'd started. I declared a major in sports management, which sounded boring when I said it out loud, but which actually meant I got to study the intersection of athletic performance and business strategy, which turned out to be the only thing I'd ever been interested in that also came with a clear career path. I was 22 and a half. I had a 3.1 GPA. I drove the same Honda Civic, though I'd finally gotten the peeling paint fixed because Vanessa had insisted, repeatedly, that if I was going to be the kind of person who drove a nice car, I should at least drive a car that didn't look like it had been partially eaten by rust. She'd been joking. Mostly. Vanessa appeared in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in the blue robe I'd bought her for her birthday, not cashmere, just regular robe fabric, the kind you found at a department store. She looked softer in the mornings. Less armored. I liked that version of her, the one who hadn't yet assembled herself into the woman the world expected her to be. "You're staring," she said. "I'm appreciating." "Same thing with you." She took the coffee mug from my hand and drank from it without asking, which was something she'd started doing around month 3 of whatever we were calling this cohabitation, partnership, the ongoing project of 2 people learning how to be one unit without losing 2 selves. She'd gone back to work in January. A new firm, smaller than her last one, run by a woman who'd been her mentor at business school and who understood, in a way that Richard's world never had, that employees were people and people had lives outside the office. She was doing supply chain strategy for a consortium of sustainable agriculture startups, which sounded exactly as boring as it was, and which she loved with a quiet intensity that I found deeply attractive in a way I couldn't fully articulate. Marcus came in through the back door, sweating, his basketball shorts damp at the waistband. "Mom. Tyler. Can Tyler come to my game Saturday? He's supposed to be there." "I'll be there," I said. "Coach said if I hit 5 assists, I can start next game." "Then hit 5 assists." "That's the plan." He grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl on the counter and headed upstairs to shower. We heard his door close, then the faint sound of his speaker system powering on, some lo-fi playlist he discovered that sounded like a computer having a pleasant dream. Vanessa and I stood in the kitchen. The morning light was doing the gilded thing again. "Do you ever think about the house?" I asked. "The Brentwood house?" She didn't pretend to not know what I meant. "Sometimes. Mostly in the mornings, when I'm half awake and my brain hasn't started filtering things yet. I'll remember the kitchen, the marble counters, that sad 0 refrigerator that was always too cold. I'll remember standing in the walk-in closet looking at rows of shoes I never wore. Do you miss it? I miss the version of me that lived there. Not the life. The person. She had everything she was supposed to have and none of what she actually needed. She set her coffee mug in the sink, the same sink where she'd washed dishes the first time I'd come to her house, back when I was 20 and terrified and didn't understand yet what was about to happen to me. I don't miss that house. I miss who I was when I didn't know there was another option. And now? Now I know there was always another option. I just didn't have the courage to take it until a 20-year-old basketball coach kissed me on the cheek in a kitchen that wasn't even mine and made me feel like the bravest thing I'd ever done was also the most selfish, and I couldn't tell the difference, and for once in my life I didn't need to. I crossed the kitchen and put my arms around her. She was warm from the robe and from the shower steam still clinging to her hair. She smelled like the lavender body wash she'd started using when she moved to the townhouse, which had nothing to do with the Chanel signature she'd worn in Brentwood, and which I loved more than I could say. "I love you," I said, into her hair. "I know." She pulled back and looked at me. She was 44 now, 44 and divorced and a mother and a partner and a woman who woke up every morning in a townhouse in Mar Vista with a man who was 22 and a half and still didn't have everything figured out. And she was the most luminous person I'd ever met. Not because of what she wore or how she carried herself in a boardroom, but because she'd done the bravest thing she'd ever done and she was still standing, still breathing, still here. "I love you too. even when you leave your coffee mugs all over the house. I don't. That mug in the living room. The one by the couch. Don't pretend you don't know. I smiled. I'll get it later. You'll get it now. I don't want it sitting there when Marcus has friends over. I kissed her forehead and went to retrieve the mug. It was on the side table by the couch, half full of cold coffee that I didn't remember drinking. I poured it out and rinsed the mug in the bathroom sink and came back and set it in the dishwasher. Through the window, Marcus was back in the yard. He was practicing free throws now, the same 20 in a row, same ritual every morning, same count. I'd started teaching him that routine when he was 13, and I'd kept teaching him that discipline as he grew. The idea that excellence wasn't about inspiration but about repetition, about showing up every day and doing the work even when no one was watching. He made 19 of 20. He went inside to get ready for school. Vanessa appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, now dressed, not in a blazer and silk blouse, but in the kind of clothes she wore to her new office, which was a converted warehouse in Culver City with exposed brick and communal coffee and a CEO who wore hoodies to board meetings. She looked like herself. She looked like who she'd been before Brentwood, before Richard, before she'd learned to be smaller than her own ambitions. I'm running late, she said. Client call at 9. Go. You'll be at the game Saturday? Wouldn't miss it. She blew me a kiss from the doorway and grabbed her bag from the hook by the front door. The same gesture, every morning, a ritual I'd stopped noticing until suddenly I couldn't imagine a morning without it. The door closed. Her car started in the driveway, a Tesla now, because she'd finally conceded that the G-Wagon was Richard's and she'd wanted something that was actually hers. I heard her pull out and drive away, and the street was quiet, and the morning light was still doing the gilded thing, and I stood in the kitchen of the house we shared and felt, for the first time in as long as I could remember, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Richard had remarried. He'd met someone at a conference in Chicago, a woman named Diana who was 36 and worked in private equity and who Vanessa described as aggressively appropriate in a tone that suggested she meant it as a compliment more than a criticism. Marcus spent Thanksgiving with them last year, which was hard, Vanessa admitted, but manageable. Richard was a better stepfather than he'd been a father, which said something about the man. He was better at relationships where he could perform a role than at ones where he had to simply be present. Diana had 2 kids from a previous marriage, and Richard could do the stepfather thing, the supportive weekend parent thing, because it was scripted and he was good at scripts. Marcus adjusted. That was what kids did. They adjusted to the new shape of their lives because they didn't have the luxury of mourning what was gone. He'd gained a stepsister and a stepbrother and a father who was marginally more present and a mother who was significantly more happy, and he'd woven all of it into the fabric of his life without complaint, because Marcus didn't complain. He noticed. He absorbed. He moved on. Sometimes, late at night, when Vanessa and I were lying in bed and the house was quiet and Marcus was asleep down the hall with his phone still clutched in his hand from whatever conversation he'd been having with his friends, Vanessa would tell me things. She'd tell me about the year she'd spent trying to make her marriage work, about the therapy sessions she'd attended alone because Richard had refused to go after the first one, about the night she'd stood in the Brentwood kitchen and looked at the Sub-Zero refrigerator and the marble counters and the life she'd built and felt, for the first time, like a prisoner who'd forgotten she was locked in. She'd tell me about the morning she'd decided, not dramatically, not in a single lightning bolt moment, but slowly, the way you decide to move from a city you love, that she was going to leave. That she was going to take Marcus and take herself and walk out of that beautiful house and into whatever came next, even if she didn't know what came next. Why didn't you do it sooner? I asked, one of those late nights. Because I was afraid. Because I'd been told my whole life that the life I had was the life I should want. Because I had a son and a house and a husband who provided and a community that respected me, and all of that was supposed to add up to happiness, and when it didn't, I thought the problem was me. She was lying on her side, her head on my shoulder, her hand resting on my chest. I thought there was something broken in me that couldn't appreciate what I'd been given. It took meeting you to understand that what I'd been given was never what I needed. And that accepting what I needed wasn't selfish. It was the first healthy thing I'd ever done. I kissed the top of her head. Her hair smelled like lavender. "I'm glad you did it," I said. "I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here too." She tilted her head up to look at me. In the dark, with only the ambient glow of the streetlight through the curtains, her face was soft and unguarded. "I'm glad you stayed. I didn't have a choice. You always had a choice. You could have walked away at any point. You could have decided this was too complicated, too age inappropriate, too entangled with someone else's mess. You were 20. You had a whole life ahead of you. You could have chosen that. But I chose this. You did. And you've never regretted it." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed on the street, headlights sweeping across the ceiling for a moment and then disappearing. "I regret the years I lost," she said finally. "I regret the years I spent in that house pretending I was happy when I wasn't. I regret the years I didn't know that there was a version of my life where I woke up next to someone who actually saw me. But the time with you? The time since we figured this out?" She put her hand on my face. "That's the only part of my life I don't regret. Every single day of it. Even the hard ones. Even the days when Marcus is frustrated and money is tight and I miss the simplicity of having a husband who handled the logistics. Even those days. Because at least they're real. At least they're mine." I pulled her closer. She let me. "I'm going to propose to you," I said. It came out before I could think about it. We hadn't talked about marriage, not seriously, not in any concrete way. We were living together, we were raising a teenager together, we were building a life that had all the infrastructure of marriage without the paperwork. And I'd been thinking about it for months, turning the idea over in my mind like a stone I'd found on the beach, examining it from every angle, trying to decide if it was something I actually wanted or something I was performing because that's what people did. "Tyler." She said my name like she always did, like she was holding it in her hands. "I'm serious. Not now. Not for a while. But soon. I want to marry you. I want to be the person who gets to do this for the rest of my life. I want to wake up every morning and know that you're the one I chose and that you chose me back." She was crying. Not sobbing, just tears, the way she did sometimes when I said something that landed somewhere she wasn't expecting. "I'm 44, she said. So you've really started your life. And I've already lived most of mine. And I don't want to be the reason you didn't get to do all the things you wanted to do. You're not a reason. You're the reason. The reason I get up. The reason I go back to school. The reason I show up every day and do the work and try to become someone who deserves to be standing in this kitchen with you. You already are someone who deserves it. Then let me prove it. Let me spend the rest of my life proving it. Not because you need me to, because I need to. Because this is what I want. You're what I want. Marcus in this house, in the mornings, in the games, in the ordinary, extraordinary, impossible life we're building. All of it. I want all of it. With you." She kissed me. She kissed me the way she'd kissed me that first night, by the pool in December, with everything she had, with all the force of a woman who'd spent years being careful and measured and appropriate and who was done with all of that now. Done with measuring herself against expectations, done with being smaller than her own heart. "Yes," she said, when we broke apart. "Yes. Not now. Not for a while. But yes. When you're ready. When we're both ready. Yes." I pulled her even closer. The streetlight was doing its ambient thing through the curtains. Marcus was asleep down the hall. The coffee mug was in the dishwasher where it belonged. And I was 22 and a half, lying in bed with the woman I loved, in a townhouse in Mar Vista, and I understood, finally, fully, in a way I hadn't understood anything before, that there was no such thing as the right time or the right age or the right circumstances. There was only the choice. And the choice was ours. And we'd made it. And whatever came next, we would figure it out together. The younger man's heart. She was married. He was 20. Everything was about to change. That spring, Marcus's team made it to the regional finals. He didn't start. He was sixth man, a defensive specialist who came in to disrupt the other team's guards in the fourth quarter. In the final games, with 30 seconds left and his team down by 2, he stole the ball at half court, drove the lane, and found his teammate open under the basket for the game-tying layup. They won in overtime. After the game, Vanessa found me in the crowd outside the gym. She was wearing a UCLA sweatshirt, my UCLA sweatshirt, actually, which she'd stolen from my laundry and refused to return, and her eyes were red from cheering. "Did you see that pass?" she said. "Did you see it? I taught him that. You taught him to be patient. That's different." She grabbed my hand and squeezed it. "You're good at this. The teaching thing. All of it. I'm good at you. You're adequate at me." She smiled. "But you're getting better." Marcus emerged from the gym 20 minutes later, his jersey damp with sweat and his grin wider than I'd ever seen it. He saw Vanessa and ran to her, and she caught him in a hug that lifted him slightly off the ground. He was taller than her now, but she held him like he was still 8 years old, still the boy who looked at me with those two knowing eyes and told me his mother wasn't fine. "We did it," Marcus said into her shoulder. "You did it," she said. "I'm so proud of you." He pulled back and looked at me. "Coach Derek says I should think about playing travel ball next year. Private coaching. Tournaments in Arizona and Nevada." "That's a big commitment," I said. "I know. But I think I'm actually good at this. Like, actually good. Not just good for my age. Actually good." "Then you should do it," I said. "If you want it, go get it." He nodded, then surprised me. He pulled me into a hug, quick and tight, the kind of hug that boys give when they don't know how to say things with words. "Thanks, Tyler," he said. "For everything. Anytime, man." We walked to the car together, the three of us, the way families do. The parking lot was emptying out, the LA evening was cooling into something almost pleasant, and Vanessa had her hand in mine, and Marcus was ahead of us carrying his gym bag and checking his phone, and the sky was doing that thing it does in LA where the last light turns everything the color of apricots and honey and everything soft and warm and worth holding on to. "So," Vanessa said as we reached the car. "Dinner? Something terrible?" "I'm in the mood for something terrible." "Denny's?" I suggested. "Denny's," she agreed. "The most terrible, perfect Denny's." Marcus looked up from his phone. "Can I get pancakes?" "You can get whatever you want," Vanessa said. "You earned it." We drove to the Denny's on Lincoln, the one that was open 24 hours and always had a weird smell near the fries and served coffee that tasted like regret. We sat in a corner booth and Marcus ordered a short stack and Vanessa ordered a club sandwich and I ordered whatever was fastest, and we talked about the game and about travel ball and about whether the Lakers would ever be good again, and it was the most ordinary night of our lives. And it was perfect.